Just wanted to do a relatively short video that I mentioned about on the Beat the Banks and the Bailiffs Facebook page and asked if I could put it up. To just tell people about a situation that my wife and I faced recently that appears to be the new precedent that's being set with regards to bullshit warrants, particularly alleged liability orders, possession warrants and breach of access or forced access warrants. Just to give you a very quick bit of background, I'm not a solicitor, but I have an extensive knowledge of the law from both an educational perspective at high level and a personal interest over 20 years. I'd be fairly confident to match my legal knowledge against an entire shift of a city's police force, and certainly against most solicitors that I've met. But please, I am not giving you legal advice. Now, we had a situation where we're in dispute, a valid dispute with an energy provider. And we had a circumstance where a bailiff arrived at the door. I made it very clear to him that I knew that the warrant he was presenting was not lawful, because we knew categorically that he hadn't followed the Gas Board and Electricity Act 1954, which states very clearly the timeframes where an individual or individuals have to be informed with A, the time period of the hearing, and B, the time hearing of any execution of said warrant. I made it very clear to him that it wasn't personal. I'd got nothing against him, but I know by absolute fact that the vast majority of warrants, whether they be for council tax, which is important to point out here, council tax is a civil matter as per the 1992 Local Government Finance Act and revisions 2003. It's a civil matter. The police should never get involved. They will use the bullshit excuse they're there to prevent the breach of the peace, but initially, if the police turn up with the bailiff, which is questionable because they can't provide evidence that there's likely to be a breach of the peace, because they're making an assumption on your character, which both legislatively and lawfully is wrong, but irrelevant at the minute. But we're seeing it increasingly with TV licensing, and particularly with forced entry warrants with regards to gas and electricity supplies. Police shouldn't be getting involved. What we had this week, or last week I should say, was a police officer that had clearly made his decision before he'd even arrived at our property. There were two PCSOs. One of them allegedly had a law degree where she graduated in 2001. I'll explain in a few minutes why I dispute that. I'd be very, very surprised if she has a law degree. If she did, she got it from Trumpton University. And if she got it from a genuine university, she must have been by far the worst performing law student that's ever graced our great nation's universities. There are a number of processes that must be completed for any of these warrants to stand validity. My biggest concern is with TV licensing at the minute, because warrants are being issued with the hearsay of an individual. Now, I'm going to explain to you what hearsay is. Your date of birth, when you provide it, is hearsay. And in the vast majority of cases, dependent regardlessly actually whether we're looking at common law or legislation, statutes and parliamentary acts, hearsay is non-admissible because it's based upon an individual's opinion. And the reason why your date of birth is hearsay is because you as an individual cannot guarantee it. You were provided that by a third party. Not a single person alive can remember the day they were born. They certainly can't remember it to a position of accuracy where they know the exact date. So it's quite amusing when you're asked to provide your date of birth, particularly by a police officer, and they're asking you for something that actually has, from a lawful perspective, absolutely no validity. However, a number of forced entry warrants are being issued for TV licensing based purely upon hearsay. They're being applied for with lies, with information that Capita, for example, cannot substantiate, they cannot back up. We've seen a number of these instances with flats. Well, if you live on the 4th floor of a flat, how on earth can a Capita goon say on oath, which they would have to do in theory, and I say that with the pathetic inverted commas, in theory on oath, if they would have to have actually seen you watching TV. But we'll move on to that in a second. Our situation was the warrant, the vast majority of these warrants, I know there's been a lot of information provided through things like the Freeman movement and various things that warrants have to be with wet ink and all this other stuff, and technically they're kind of true, but that's not actually the case in lots of circumstances. What has to be in existence is a warrant with the judge's name printed and signed in existence, and you're not out of your rights asking for at least to see a photocopy of that, but you don't actually have to see the original with wet ink. It just has to be in existence. What we were provided with was something that was printed by a company who are fundamentally a bailiff that works on behalf of the energy provider. The circumstance we had was we had the Magistrates Court on the telephone, we had documentation, we had CCTV that proved that the bailiff was giving information he knew was false to a police officer. Now, we don't specifically have laws under the term of obstruction of justice, but we do have perverting the course of justice, and there are a number of laws in place and parliamentary acts where an individual who is providing statements to a police officer, for example, that he knows are untrue, that's a criminal offence. If you have a bailiff providing a document that they state to you has more power than it actually does, that's a criminal offence. We've seen this quite a lot recently with council tax. Bailiffs coming up to front doors of people and saying that they've got a warrant for your arrest. Bullshit. It means nothing. They have no powers whatsoever. The only power a bailiff in the vast majority of cases has is the power that you give to them. In fact, I object to calling them bailiffs because they're not. They're licensed debt collectors. Bailiffs and High Court enforcement officers are rare. The vast majority of these muppets are licensed debt collectors, and they have no power whatsoever, particularly with council tax. Yes, we've seen a very, very tiny number of cases where individuals have been arrested by police at their door and taken to court, but they are very, very rare. And certainly the handful that I've heard of and looked into, that's placed both the police and the magistrate court in a bit of hot water, because the Local Authority Finance Act, particularly with council tax, is a civil matter. The police should not get involved. Their only reason for being there is a prevent of the breach of the peace. And actually there should be, an individual has to have reasonable grounds to believe that there is the potential for a breach of the peace. Which, how can a bailiff possibly know that before they've even knocked on your front door? And we've seen this consistently now, where police are turning up with bailiffs. That in itself is morally abhorrent in my book. But my point of this video is, there is a growing number of individuals across the country who are standing up to TV licensing, to council tax, to bailiffs, and we have a growing number of successes. People are getting knowledge, and getting to understand how the law works, what their rights are, and how to argue those and debate those in an appropriate manner. What we had the other day was a situation where it didn't matter. We could have had the magistrate that issued this bogus warrant stood there on my driveway, and this particular police officer, PC Slinger, I believe, of Nottinghamshire Constabulary, I wasn't going to name him, but sod him, who basically enforced a warrant that A, he wasn't lawfully allowed to do, B, wasn't issued lawfully anyway, and C, the alleged bailiff had failed to do at least 3 steps to make that warrant lawful. You're supposed to be informed of the hearing and of the date that they're going to execute the warrant by recorded delivery. The reason recorded delivery has to be used is because it provides an evidential link. It proves they sent the letter, and when you sign for it, it proves you received it. Without that, it's hearsay, which is not admissible. But my point is that I want people, particularly on this Facebook page, to be aware of is I genuinely believe now that police forces are making the decision to enforce warrants regardless. If anybody resists, then it will end in the situation that we had of 2 choices: let them execute the warrant, or I was going to be arrested. And with my children there and my wife, I wasn't prepared to do that. And actually, there's 4 videos I had to record, and if it's okay, I will end up putting them on so you can see just the general conduct and attitude of these individuals. But I knew once we'd had confirmation from the court on the phone, let them execute the warrant, because that put us in a much stronger position. What I would say is, in these subjects, is a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Get yourself informed. Do your research. Google, as much as I despise everything they stand for, there's a huge amount of information on the internet. Get yourself understanding what legislation and what laws are there, how they impact your situation, and get to a position where you understand categorically, where you can argue it in a stressful situation. You know exactly what your rights are, because it gives you a fighting chance. I did, but there was nothing I could do, because ultimately a police officer had made a decision. Regardless of what evidence we could provide, I either let the warrant be executed or I'm going to spend the day in the cells. And actually, when I balanced it up, I realised that actually it was better to let them execute the warrant, because it was unlawful. And there were 2 PCSOs and a police officer who are now facing a pretty serious complaint, as are the company that obtained an unlawful warrant. This isn't a new thing. Capita, with regards to TV licensing, have been doing this for a long time. Like I said, I could ring up my local police force and say, oh, my next door neighbour Joe Bloggs, he's dealing drugs. The police aren't just going to go to a magistrate and get a lawful warrant. They would need to have reasonable grounds, reasonable suspicion. They wouldn't take that from an individual's word, hearsay. However, what we're seeing with Capita, and what we're seeing with the various bailiff agencies, whether it be Marston's, Equator, and the rest of these lying detritus scumbags, is they're not providing the evidence that they have to get these warrants. They're just saying they've got it. There's a bigger problem here, that the fact the magistrates aren't doing their job by issuing warrants with the right boxes ticked and the right information and evidence provided. The bailiff companies are at fault because they are obtaining warrants by deception, and the police are at fault because they are enforcing warrants that aren't lawful. But what you're going to see is a greater degree of police forces just backing warrants, backing bailiffs, regardless of what evidence you can provide. So it makes it even more imperative that you get educated, you understand what laws are relevant. And when you're going back to things like the Gas Board and Electricity Act 1954, you've really got to do your research to understand what the country's laws say should be done. I'm going to keep it and end it there, because I think I've given you enough information. My major point is to understand that there is going to be a sea change, and that's because of Facebook pages like this, who are standing up to these fraudsters, these pirates, call them what you will. But we are going to have to learn a new way to fight this, and to be more assertive, and to have better knowledge, and to be able to have those acts and laws to hand, so we can fight criminal behaviour like I've seen. And I'll be honest, I've defended the police. I've said, no, I don't believe this. And I've seen the videos for myself, but I wasn't going to believe it till I saw it with my own eyes. We had evidence to prove that the guy was lying and that the warrant wasn't valid, yet a police officer executed it anyway. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Any comments you want to leave, or any questions you want to ask, you're more than welcome to. I'll add the videos of what happened on the actual day once I've had a chance to go through them properly, and that no personal details and stuff like that's on there. So you can get an idea of what we said, and basically the attitude of the police. That's the most important thing for you to see. But I hope that helps. Cheers, guys.